Thank you for joining us today. Over the last day, there have been a lot of conversations about AI and, some of the insights and implications as it relates to communications. And our hope today is that this conversation picks up right where that left off and gives you a playbook of sorts that you can use, take back to your organizations, really regardless of where they may be or you may be in your AI journey. We know there are varying levels of fluency still, varying levels of tech embedded, and things are evolving at a pace that is enough to give any of us whiplash. So at the end, I'm going to open up for questions. Our hope is that this conversation is a little bit like watching us talk within our own conference room about what we're up
Awkwardly
against.
into a microphone.
We'll make it seem
I
real.
am, by way of introductions, I'm joined by my colleagues. This is Theresa Dolge. She's our Chief Media Officer at Inizio Evoke Comms, and Will Reese, who is our Head of Innovation at Inizio Evoke.
Thanks, Kel.
Sure. All right, let's jump in.
Let's get into it.
Let's get into it. Theresa, we've heard how AI is changing how we surface information. Why is earned media uniquely consequential in this moment? Go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I think you probably have heard at a number of these that 90% of the information that is getting filtered into the LLMs is earned media coverage, and that is correct. But there is parts of this conversation that we need to go a little bit deeper on, and those are, who are the people we're trying to reach, right? When we're looking at reaching the unwashed masses, which will beautifully explain how that all works, how everything gets scraped. But make no bones about it, the people going into the LLMs are those unwashed masses, and we want to rank high in the content that we're putting out there and the conversations that we're having, right? So we have to look at our press releases or anything we're putting out there right now and make sure it's highly validated. This is something as communications people, we have always known, but the LLMs are making it even more important right now. So it might be nice to put a quote from your leader in that release, but you know what would be better? A quote from an advocacy organization, and that same quote lives on a website somewhere, and that same quote is in an earned media article that is placed somewhere, because that will rank your information higher within the LLM. But the other side of this story is we don't ignore all of the outlets that live behind paywalls either, because those are audiences we may want to reach as well. They might not be the unwashed masses, but that's where we really need to work on our media strategy and who our audiences are.
Will, do you want to talk a bit about the cost of misrepresentation or absence with that, sort of lens towards the importance of a dimensionalized media approach?
Sure. Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, and you see it behaviorally now, when you go to the engine, you get sort of thin content. And we are going to be in a world of sort of thin and thick content. And the thin content, that overview content, that layman content gets influenced by your total presence. So the more that you can create an ambient, total, credible, engaging presence, that's how you're going to influence that thin content. But you still need that substantive, thick content, because it's almost like a sampling that the engines are going to take from that thick content. I think one of the things we've seen is many organizations, the ownership of that presence, it's actually in 10 functions or sits across multiple areas or groups. That's difficult. And that is, I think, one of the things we see today. To create that total presence, you actually need very different ways of collaborating internally. You need different ways of engaging internally. You need communication strategies that are much more holistic to be able to influence that aggregate presence. And I think the interesting dynamic now is the virality of misinformation, inaccurate information, and sort of grazed information has a higher potential risk. And if you look in aggregate across the commercial organization, the knowledge of that and managing of that really sits in oftentimes the communication function. That is a skill or superpower that sits within a part of the organization that actually needs to get seeded more broadly.
Yeah, and you know what else we were talking about, Will and I? the fundamentals of being a journalist was that you were going to go and you were going to create a story that was problem solution setup, right? That's what LLMs want now. So like we're perfectly like positioned to be the ones creating the content that is serving up solution-oriented information that will ultimately be scraped by the LLMs.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, there's a couple of things that have come out about sort of that original, like where does it get information from? What's the quality of information? Where does it cite? There was a great thing, Columbia did an analysis. 60% of the citations of LLMs are incorrect, and it varies by engine. So, Perplexity did better. My experience is they do better. I'm not saying that, but if I want something that was slightly more credible, but it still missed a lot. Like it's not great results. Ironically, Google did the worst in that analysis. That again, going back to the value of a journalist looking for those answers, citing the credible citations. There's a role for provenance and traceability. That today, again, sits across multiple functions, like where that data is getting generated in a clinical function. You just, the prior panel thinking about IR and the provenance to support those investment statements and disclosure, that the ownership of that traceability, somebody needs to have visibility into that. Somebody needs to think through those details. Those details is what really does enhance your ability to show up in an engine.
So if I'm hearing you, then really sort of step one in our playbook would be to audit your visibility.
100%, yeah.
And is there, just not to get too tactical, but what's the best way for one to go about doing that?
I mean, I think it's really important for us to take a step back and think about what are we communicating and who are we communicating that to about ourselves, because the audiences matter now, right? Because we're talking about what's going to be scrapable for an LLM and what's going to sit behind a paywall and may never end up in the hands of the unwashed masses. So I think now more than ever, it's important to be looking at those things and to be asking questions and to have a question-oriented mindset, because that is going to get you the content that you need that will be valuable for those LLMs and probably for those audiences that are sitting behind paywalls as well, depending on who they are. And I think that's where we as communications people are actually doing a lot of that questioning and work, and maybe not making it work hard enough for us, if that makes any sense. So like when you think about going and media training executives or spokespeople, we're coming up with some of the hardest questions that you can be asked in your media training. Why? Because that, when you go talk to the media, it should be a cakewalk, right? Like we should be drilling you. Where do those questions then go? Can we be repurposing them to create more content? Food for thought.
So Theresa, then taking that sort of a step further, every story, every message starts with a strategy. How are our media strategies changing?
I think we have to be really laser focused on the audiences we want to reach, and then work on messaging that is, curious, questioning that. Is the information that we're going to put out there going to provide a solution? Because that also gets us ranked higher, right? Like if we're giving that solution-oriented information. But I do think right now we are living in a time frame where AI is working at a speed that is not human speed, which means that the rate of mis and disinformation is at a level it has never been seen before. It is faster than us, and it will always be faster than us. So how do you get ahead of that? We have to be prepared. We used to sit here as comms people and say, we have a process in place, we have a method, this is how we're going to communicate this out, and these are the people we're going to bring in. Now, we need to be thinking a little bit differently, right? We need to be prepared and monitoring and looking for those risks and red flags way earlier than we ever have before. So in order to combat mis and disinformation with AI, we have to use AI to prepare ourselves for issues now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and does lead directly into, I think, talking about optimizing content. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, And they noted that, isn't it so interesting that we talk about omni-channel strategies very broadly, and so often they do not include owned and earned. And so, as I think about really being a steward of AI within an organization, the idea of making sure that content is optimized is important and inclusive. Will, what are some of the best ways we could, bridge those conversations coming from the marketing side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are practical things. I think much of the content that you see that gets created, especially in own channels, isn't actually very AI and model friendly. So there are things from a technology perspective to apply schema to make your content more friendly, discoverable, able to be organized by the AI. How traditional search indexed versus how AI looks at answers to questions, the holistic view of content. It's designed to try to make connections in a system that's disconnected. So it's good at sort of that system thinking. We have to recognize that we can influence that system and we're part of that system and craft the content that way. Oftentimes I see a lot of comms functions get short shrift from a technology support perspective. The technology teams follow marketing to follow priority of the organization. They do not necessarily follow on some of the comms initiatives. That's a problem. The attention, the diligence, working with them as a technology partner, how they can enhance workflows, how you can apply it more directly, how you can get those best technical practices into your content should be the demand of the organization. The more you do that, your content has the ability to thrive. I think the other side of that, when you look at the marketing side, and this space is changing pretty dynamically, is marketing attribution and how you attribute both channels as well as content within that ecosystem. Oftentimes that analysis is occurring in your organization, but it's occurring in a closed ecosystem of I did some paid work, I did some TV, I did some programmatic. Maybe they include social, sometimes they don't even include that. It often never includes earned and never includes that aggregate presence. That's a very different way of looking at aggregate attribution. When you look at the contribution in behavior change and impact, you should look at it holistically. And that doesn't occur in most organizations today.
And that's a missing link, right? There's an opportunity for us as communicators to be part of that marketing attribution model, and we should be, because what we're doing does factor into those things.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bridge to the monkey in the room, which is managing risk, for as much as we need to be seen and be visible. In this industry, it does not come without its significant risks. And so as we think about ways we can help govern risk to ensure that we are visible, what are some best practices?
I mean, obviously, the crux of public relations is, it's great for you as a company to go out there and beat your chest, but what's even better is for highly credible organizations, KOLs, patients to be beating your chest for you. And I think that the irony of all of this is that I think AI has figured that out, right? That's why they're ranking those things higher, because they realize that is, more credible. So it should get pulled in there. But I think with the risk comes being prepared. And like I said before, I don't think being prepared looks the same as it probably did before. Yeah. We need to have AI models set up tracking for the risks to come up. I think media monitoring probably has never been more important. And it's something that we have seen a lot of organizations scale back on. But how are you going to find that red flag or that risk before it happens if you're not deeply and meaningfully media monitoring to catch it? If it's happening in conversations on social, or if it's happening in actual media articles that are behind a paywall. We need to know that those are happening in real time so that we can prepare for the risk that comes along with that. And then we need to mobilize the people and the organizations that are credible to stand beside us if we are going to go into an issue.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a different era in the virality of risk, in misinformation exchange. I don't know if you guys have seen Nano Banana. I just wanted to say that. It's a weird name for Google. I don't know why they called it that. But the image gen, that you can't probably trust any image that gets created is a reality today. And that's a reality. It took some skills, like I could finesse most of the models to make something fairly decent. Now anybody in 5 minutes can make something that looks pretty accurate. And your ability, it isn't boomer's not going to get it. No, a 10-year-old's not going to get it. Like no one's going to get that this isn't accurate. So your inaccuracy is not even in the written word, it's in the visual word now. Your ability to monitor, understand that risk, address that risk, communicate that risk. I think oftentimes, I've seen some terrific risk planning and mitigation and the predictability and the usage of tools, but it sits on the comm side and does not get disseminated over to the marketing side and doesn't get disseminated over to that total presence. That's a gap. Like recognition of that holistic view of risk changes how you'd manage it, but it also opens up opportunities then, because the more proactive you can lean into it, again, your visibility, your credibility, your trustworthiness, you have that aggregate impact. But it's a little siloed today, and we're in a world of transparency and that potential for misinformation, and you kind of have to connect those dots.
Yeah, I think, right, we certainly have an opportunity as communicators to be the connective tissue across organizations. I think, beyond just, right, we want to go directly sometimes when it comes to issues to a best practice or, a specific resource. And I think the soft skills are really important, being immersed enough in the business to be able to be championing optimization of content, to be facilitating a lens toward where visibility might be limited, and in so now you have a bit of a more proactive approach to governing risk for the business. If there's so many tools out there right now, right? We've all heard there's chat, there's Claude, there's a host of platforms and resources. Where do you think, as communicators with limited resources and oftentimes smaller headcount, we should be thinking about investment around innovation or tools for our teams?
Yeah, I think what you see emerging, and there's a number of tools out there that are looking at share of model. So again, share of voice, you're now looking at share of model. You're looking at multiple models and what is your aggregate presence across those models. And that presence, the space is going to evolve pretty quickly. That presence today is fine if I'm looking up, maybe basic drug facts versus a competitor. It's a reasonably accurate approach. It is not yet fine-tuned for fast traveling stuff. That is a case where you're going to have to look at some of the traditional media monitoring tools, the traditional social tools, but in a bit of a different fashion of what's that virality, where is it getting picked up, sort of point the tools in a little bit of a different manner to get that full perspective. Because some of the share model things are great, compare me, but not great to show me like an immediacy and point in time. And I think where the tool sets are going to evolve is to show that immediacy. You're going to get it's much more like an alert system and an active alert system than what it is today, which is a little benchmarky. And we saw this in social, probably 20 years ago. This is going to evolve similarly.
And I would just say, I think creating custom AI agents is kind of where a lot of things are going, right? And I think investing in an AI infrastructure that you keep within your organization that allows you to monitor in real time and have predictability, things might be going there. And then I also think the idea around digital twins is also really interesting, because we can load up a digital twin for a journalist, and then we can test what we pitch them, if they'd be interested in what we have to say, and then based on that information, fine-tune our pitch. Listen, I'm not saying that we need to use robots. This goes the antithesis, right, of what any journalist would ever say, right? That's why they're all fighting with all the LLMs and not letting them get behind their paywalls and getting their content because they don't think robots should rule these things. But we can utilize these tools to make our jobs better and more fine-tuned, and then overlay that with human intelligence, because that is something Will and I have talked about a lot, in that, you can create all of these things that are going to allow for efficiencies, but you also need extremely bright individuals overseeing what is being put in those and what you're taking out of them.
Yeah, I think that, it probably dates me, but Bionic, once upon a time there was a show, Bionic Man. It was exciting. There was the Bionic Woman. Go back, 70s.
I remember it.
Yeah, a couple people here get it. Yeah, $6 million man.
That's right.
Yeah, it's great. But to me, that's a better way of thinking about it. It made him smarter, better, faster. It didn't replace him. It wasn't Robo-Man. To me, the organizations need to take stock of ingenuity, creativity.
Yeah.
I have seen organizations, I would argue, divest in those skill sets. And 100%, it impacted their bottom line. It impacted their ability to do marketing. It impacted how they engage with customers. It had an impact. Whether the organization wants to admit to the impact, it had an impact. I think the more that you can bring that skill set, harness that, apply it, then you're going to get more out of AI. AI unto itself is going to create this sea of parity. So now you're all equal in the base level of doing. The human bit, the depth of understanding of real needs that exist, the depth of understanding of customers, your human relationships with them, the depth of insights to power a digital twin, that'll separate you. Otherwise, everybody's equal. So you can't overinvest in technology without the human change bit, or you're going to be disappointed in the transformation.
Yeah, I feel like, the best advice I would give someone is to, be a champion of questions as well. These are hard times, right? We're all really busy. We're working, we're doing more with less. And I think it's easy to go head down and focus on the work in front of you. And it's more important now than ever to be out of our seats, out of our desks. Some of us aren't even in offices. So to be looking for ways to connect across the organizations and, stay the pulse of information, what innovations and developments and tools are being adopted in other places, so that we can have a, as broad a vantage point as we can in terms of what's happening across the organization, and then be thinking about where we can collaborate more to plug in, to close the gaps. Okay, we're down to sort of the last 5 minutes, and I want to make sure there's time for everyone to ask questions. But if there was one thing you would say somebody should do as they think about just leaving this meeting and being a little more front-footed when it comes to influencing LLMs, what would it be?
You go first.
Good to go first? Yeah, I mean, I think one practical thing, and sort of one of my soapboxes is many of us are all doing some kind of annual planning, brand planning. There's planning season is ongoing, depending on where you're at. It could be in tactical planning, operational planning. Everybody's got a name for it. That process, Pharma is the only industry that does that as an annual process and tries to predict the future a year later. Every other industry that I've ever worked in does it as an ongoing. They have a blueprint, but they are optimizing and changing. And that is a process you can influence. Thinking about that presence, benchmark the presence going in, like we do landscapes, bring that presence analysis. Cut across multiple functions, do some different collaborative sessions. That's a place where you're investing a lot of time, run that process, engage in that process differently. That will impact how you show up in the space next year. Have a goal. It came up in the last session, a goal and a benchmark. Today we do these things. Here's the results. Here's how much time. Here's the value. And then have a goal that's built into that process to change that moving into next year.
I would say mine is many things.
One.
I get one. I just feel like when you're looking at putting out information externally, I think it is the way that these LLMs are looking at that information as whether it's credible or not, I think is correct. And we should take a step back and remind ourselves, we should be curious and always questioning. That should be at the heart of what we do. That is at the heart of what any journalist has been taught to do, right? And we should be serving up content that is a solution to a problem that currently exists. It should be new solutions, right? New information equals news. And I also think having those credible other voices outside of yourself is also important, whether that's a third-party advocate or an extremely esteemed KOL, because that will increase your ranking, but it also makes the story so much richer.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, out to you guys. I hope you have some questions.
Yes.
From Kincaid Communications. I have a question about, I've heard different things this week, but you're saying that media behind paywalls are not getting picked up by AI. So I want to get a story in the Wall Street Journal, I do. How does that get picked up?
So it's not going to get scraped because you have to pay in order to access that, unless,
You have an engagement with the model,
correct.
which many of the publisher sources are now working with. And this is where it's going to get more complicated. They may work with a single model, not 3 other models. And then, and other companies are picking up, like ChatGPT becomes our engine underneath. So the models are getting syndicated and they're getting slightly different views of the closed content.
Because the journal wants to be represented.
100%. And the eyeballs matter to them as well. But again, they want to get fair value for their content.
Right, it's copyright issues.
But that's basically going to keep changing. I think they're going to keep making more and more deals. It's almost like TV syndication deals that you're gonna see that. Because
So you might get it in Gemini, but not in Claude,
right.
right?
Great. And then second question is, if I have a press release where it's a trial start, it's not worth using my KOL in this release because I want to save that for next. I have sites, but I don't have a listicle. I don't have, some of the other things that I guess AI likes. Is there anything else I can do in that press release to influence pickup?
Yeah, I mean, you can do well-structured press releases with schema so that on the back end from a coding perspective, you can actually build in almost a text language that gives the AI the structure of the release. You can do it even for trial disclosure and going through that. You're almost it's back end code that basically says this is what all these structures are. And then the AI looks at, oh, okay, this is what it is trying to do or what it's trying to communicate to me. It's more than just the words. It literally is. Well, this is where it gets a little weird because if you're using some of the syndication engines, theoretically, some of them may apply that. Other times it may not. Or if the release gets even put up on a corp site on there, that may not. Like that, you definitely could control, or whoever controls corp.com could enable that. And I would say so. They 70% plus of pharma properties don't use schema and are not doing some of the best practices from a back end code, which is hindering it. It still will look at the body, but it is just less good for it to make the connections.
Thank you all so much for being here. Ann Woodbury with Cure Strategies. I'm curious, obviously other things are changing so rapidly, as you just mentioned, like Wall Street Journal having different types of licensing agreements and different types of software that's out there. Other than Fierce, of course, let's give some credit there. Are there some sources that you all like to, either newsletters, podcasts, how are you keeping up with specifically healthcare PR and how it's changing and can be used?
Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, there are many very reputable media outlets that are not behind paywalls, and those are all the wires. So AP, Reuters, well, not Bloomberg, obviously. They have the terminal, which has always been challenging. But I find them to be extremely credible, and they get scraped into those things. I actually read the Wall Street Journal every single morning. It's probably one of my favorite outlets. But it is interesting to see and think about the fact that some of that content that they're putting out there, which is extremely valuable and does often kind of play in our space and talk about what our lives might be like, the workplace articles, I should say, sometimes really speak to me in comms when I'm reading that. But obviously I read PR Week like the rest of all of us. And I find great value in reading PR Week. But again, is that getting scraped? Maybe the first couple articles that are free are, but then later not. So it's interesting to think, does that change the influence of these outlets? And I think it does for now, but it may not always.
And I would say agents. So like going back, historically we used to set up RSS feeds for brands and monitoring some of that. Like again, personally, you can do some really cool stuff in ChatGPT with their agent mode, and it does a really nice job harvesting across a variety of information. Like it is a smart RSS, think of it that way. And if there's topics that are broad media, it does a pretty nice harvest, and you can set up a daily task and it literally will tell you, it'll give you a daily download of things. That's a huge help.
And I'd say the other thing too is to speak, like you were like, where do we go for information? I go to Substack now. I don't know if anybody in this room is on Substack, reading any Substack, but you should, because that's where all the journalists are going right now, because the newsrooms are shrinking and they are looking for alternate ways to profit and get closer to the audiences that they want to reach. And it is through those newsletters that they are able to do that. Now, a lot of them don't get scraped because some are free, but some you have to pay a subscription for. But I think that is where the thin and the thick line, which right? Like the thinner line is the free content. The thicker line is the pay content.
All right. Oh, sure. One more question.
Yes. Yes, I think they don't know what to do, Dana. I don't think they know.
I don't want to read crap from something that's free. I want to read it from the premium source.
No, well, it's so funny because someone on our team was talking to NBC today, and they were like, we're never going to not be behind a paywall. We will not give in. This is like, ruining journalistic integrity, I guess you could say. New York Times say that reporters have very deep opinions about this. But I think the sad reality is they may eventually have to cave into that. I mean,
Right.
yeah. So I get it. I get how they're feeling because they feel like, it was always that blurred line, right, between paid and earned. But sometimes you have to adjust with the times. For sure.
All right. We're being flagged for time. Thank you for coming,
getting the hug.
and we'll be around if there are other questions.